Picture this. You're swimming in crystal clear waters off the coast of ancient California 15 million years ago. The sun filters down through the waves, creating dancing patterns of light below the surface. But suddenly, the water around you goes dark. Something massive is approaching from the depths, something so enormous that its shadow blocks out the sun completely. What emerges from the darkness is a creature so terrifying, so impossibly large, that it defies belief. A shark nearly 60 feet long, with jaws that could swallow a small boat whole. Teeth the size of your hand, serrated like steak knives, designed for one purpose: destruction. This is Carcharical's Megalodon, the largest predatory shark that ever lived. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. This apex predator, this absolute unit of the ancient seas, this creature that ruled the oceans for over 14 million years, just vanished, disappeared, gone. And the story of how and why that happened is way more complicated than most people think. Now, you've probably heard the basics before. Maybe you've seen those documentaries that claim megalodons went extinct because the oceans got too cold, or that their prey disappeared. But what if I told you that the real story behind Megalodon's extinction involves a perfect storm of catastrophic events, evolutionary arms races, and one particularly surprising culprit that most people will never see coming? Because here's what's fascinating. Megalodons weren't just big sharks. They were evolutionary masterpieces, perfectly adapted killing machines that had dominated marine ecosystems since the early Miocene epoch. These weren't your average great whites on steroids. No, these were something entirely different, something that had evolved specialized hunting strategies, preferred specific habitats, and had complex relationships with their prey that we're only just beginning to understand. The extinction of Megalodon around 3.6 million years ago wasn't just the end of one species. It was the collapse of an entire ecological system that had existed for millions of years, and the ripple effects of their disappearance can still be felt in our oceans today. So what actually killed off the most successful marine predator in Earth's history? Well, the answer involves cooling seas, yes, but also shifting continents, changing ocean currents, and a group of unlikely competitors that you probably wouldn't expect. There were also some major changes happening to their primary food sources, changes that turned their greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. But perhaps most intriguingly, recent research has uncovered evidence that suggests megalodons might have been dealing with problems that went far beyond simple environmental changes. We're talking about potential disease, competition from smaller but more efficient predators, and even possible reproductive challenges that could have sealed their fate long before the final environmental pressures kicked in. The fossil record tells us a story that's both more complex and more dramatic than the simple climate change narrative you've probably heard. Because when you really dig into the evidence, when you examine the teeth, the vertebrae, the bite marks on whale bones from that time period, you start to see patterns that paint a picture of an ecosystem in chaos. And here's where it gets really interesting. The timeline of Megalodon's extinction coincides almost perfectly with some major evolutionary developments in other marine species. Coincidence? Probably not. The oceans of the Pliocene epoch were undergoing massive changes, and Megalodon found itself caught in the middle of an evolutionary battlefield where only the most adaptable would survive. What we're about to explore challenges everything you thought you knew about these ancient giants, because the truth behind Megalodon's extinction isn't just about one massive predator disappearing from the fossil record. It's about understanding how entire ecosystems can collapse, how evolutionary success can become evolutionary failure, and how even the most dominant species on Earth can find themselves fighting a losing battle against forces beyond their control. The first clue to understanding what really happened lies in the teeth themselves. Megalodon teeth from the late Miocene period show something fascinating. They they start getting smaller. Not just occasionally, but consistently across multiple fossil sites around the world. And when paleontologists examined these teeth under microscopes, they found evidence of increased wear patterns, suggesting these massive sharks were having to work harder for their meals. Now, you might think smaller teeth meant smaller sharks, but that's not necessarily the case. What researchers discovered was that megalodons were actually changing their hunting strategies. The smaller, more pointed teeth were better suited for grabbing faster, more agile prey, rather than the massive, slow-moving whales they had traditionally hunted. And this is where the story gets really wild. Around 4 million years ago, something revolutionary was happening in the ocean. Baleen whales, those filter-feeding giants we know today, were undergoing their own evolutionary explosion. But here's the kicker. They weren't getting bigger like you might expect. They were getting faster, more efficient, and developing entirely new feeding behaviors that allowed them to exploit food sources in ways megalodons simply couldn't match. Think about it from Megalodon's perspective. For millions of years, you've been the undisputed king of the ocean. Your hunting strategy is simple. Find something big, bite it with your massive jaws, and wait for it to bleed out. It's worked perfectly for 14 million years. But suddenly, your prey is becoming harder to catch, and new competitors are moving into your neighborhood. Because that's exactly what was happening. Great whites, those smaller but incredibly efficient predators, were spreading into megalodons' traditional hunting grounds. And while a great white might only be a fifth the size of a megalodon, they had some serious advantages. They were faster, more maneuverable, and could survive in cooler waters where megalodons struggled to maintain their massive body temperatures. So, there you have it. The truth behind Megalodon's extinction wasn't some dramatic Hollywood ending with a single catastrophic event. Instead, it was death by 1,000 cuts. Climate change, shifting prey behaviors, new competitors, changing ocean chemistry, and evolving ecosystems all conspired against these ancient giants. Even the most successful predator in Earth's history couldn't adapt fast enough when everything changed at once. It's a reminder that in the natural world, dominance is never permanent. Evolution is always moving, always testing, always finding new solutions. And sometimes, being the biggest and most powerful isn't enough when the rules of the game suddenly change. What happened to Megalodon 3.5 million years ago continues to echo through our oceans today. Their disappearance reshaped marine ecosystems in ways we're still discovering. It paved the way for the incredible diversity of marine life we see now, from the great whites that inherited their role as apex predators, to the massive baleen whales that learned to thrive in their absence. The next time you're standing on a beach, looking out at those endless blue waters, remember that beneath those waves lies the graveyard of giants, creatures so massive and so successful that they ruled the seas for longer than humans have existed. Yet they remind us that even the mightiest can fall when the world decides to change the rules. The story of Megalodon's extinction shows us that survival isn't about being the biggest or the strongest. It's about being able to adapt when everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down.